I think we can start. I had a few persons telling me they were waiting, so let's hope they can get in. Well, good morning again, and welcome to our UN75 dialogue. This is our third open dialogue, but actually our seventh dialogue. We've shared and have a conversation with so far over 125 persons, and so you will be added to the list of persons who have participated in this dialogue. UN 75, why 75? The United Nations is celebrating 75 years, and they're having this great conversation in order to shape a future together, the future that we desire, the future that we want to create, not only for us, but certainly for our next generation. There are many issues confronting us today, and we continue to see them. Currently, of course, we have the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had the recent flooding in Belize. We've seen areas of gender inequality. We've seen rising crime and violence. We've seen change in our demographic shifts. And so we're seeing a lot happening both in Belize and globally. And so what the UN is doing is igniting this great conversation as to what are some of the actions that we need to do now to address some of our challenges, as well as start thinking as to what are some of the issues and actions that we are seeing in the years to come. Of course, UN will be celebrating 100 years in 2045. So what are some of those issues, and what are some of those actions we also should be taking by then? So today is, like I said, the third in a series of what we call open dialogue. And we're hoping that we're going to have the great conversation that we're going to hear from you. I have with us this morning Zana Kirsten Wade from the United Nations. She's going to say a few opening words. Zana?
Hi, yes, good morning, everyone. Oh, sorry about that. Having a bad connection this morning, so sorry. Yes, welcome to our conversation to mark our 75th anniversary. The United Nations is igniting a people's debate launched by our Secretary General. It promises to be the largest and furthest reaching global conversation ever to build on the future we want. So very much appreciate your time this morning to join us to dynamic conversation. Through UN 75, the United Nations will encourage people to put their heads together to define how enhanced cooperation can help realize a better world. We have three big questions that we want to ask, and that's: what kind of future do we want to create? Are we on track? What action is needed to bridge the gap? Anyone can join these conversations, and that's what makes this so unique. So I'll just leave you with that, as I know this is going to be a long conversation, one I hope you enjoy. But once again, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Zana. And as Zana has said, UN has ignited this great conversation. And so, as I had said previously, it's a process that we've been going through. We've had some small groups and we've had some large groups. But the key for us is to ensure that no one is left behind, that every issue that is important to each and every one of you is brought to the forefront, and for us to start thinking and putting our heads together. Yes, we have issues. Yes, we have risks. But what are the opportunities for change, and how can we together contribute to shaping that future? So we're going to start then the conversation just by sharing some quick little rules of the game. We're asking, of course, that you keep your mics on mute. But throughout this process, we're actually going to be asking you to speak to us, to share your thoughts on particular issues and some particular questions. We're going to also be doing some polling. So at the end of the day, we can get the common threads that bind you, the issues around which you coalesce, as well as those other issues which may be very unique and coming from your own unique perspective and lens. When we have the conversation as well, from time to time, if once we are having it open and we ask you when you wish to speak, we're just going to ask you to unmute so that we can see that you have unmuted, and then I will be calling on you. So having said all that, that was just a little bit of housekeeping. Let's start the great conversation. As I started earlier today, I spoke of some of the key issues that have been confronting us. We've seen the pandemic, we've seen flooding, we've seen crime and violence. We've seen so many issues confronting us, but I want to hear from you as the participants of this dialogue. What do you consider as some of the immediate priority issues that the United Nations ought to be addressing at this point in time? And then we're going to go to that poll that is going to then ask you, what are the priority actions that you want to see from the United Nations? So let us start then. And like I said, we are going to be able to do it two ways. There is a chat, so you can put your responses in the chat. As well, we are going to also ask you to unmute so that you can speak specific to the issue which you want to raise and which you want to say to the United Nations. This is the priority issue that we would want you to deal with today, not tomorrow, not 10 years and 15 years from now, but rather today. So we can start the chat. Like I said, you can put the issue in the chat or you can unmute and you can speak to the issue. Anyone ready to start the great conversation? Let's hear anybody.
Good morning.
Who is speaking?
Erica Jang.
Hello. Hi, Erica. Good morning. Speaking. Good morning. Go right ahead. Go right ahead, Erica.
Recently, there's been a spike in sexual offenses in the Stan Creek district. And it has to do with sometimes relationship, girlfriend and boyfriend relationship, neighborhood and babysitter relationship, father and daughter relationship. There's all kinds that are actually happening. And when these offenses occur, sometimes they are actually reported late. And sometimes people are ashamed of reporting it. And also when they are reported, sometimes the time frame for actually making that check to see if
you're breaking up a bit, Erica.
I'm sorry. The time frame. Can you guys hear me?
Erica, can you repeat the last? Yes, I'm hearing you. Can you repeat the last part you just said? You broke up just a bit.
Okay, I was talking about.
So maybe it's mine. Okay, just repeat it. Okay.
I was talking about the time frame after arrest is being made. Sometimes when you have the late complaint, it is hard to actually do a medical check on the individuals. Now, I am looking at, for example, a girlfriend and a boyfriend having issues, and then the rape happens. I believe that right now what we need is actually education across the board, whereby both men and women, children, boys and girls will be able to identify what is good touch and bad touch. And when somebody says no, it is actually no. And also for workshops in education in forms of workshop, whereby these girls will be able to see probably the kits that have been used when you do the swabbing or the making sure that they check to get evidence, so that they can actually see these things, that they really do exist, and find some way to encourage people that, you know what, respect is important. So I think that is something that really, really needs to get done urgently where I'm at.
Excellent. So Erica is speaking out of Stan Creek District, and basically she's saying that the whole issue of violence, sexual violence against out of relationships, whether it's girlfriend, boyfriend, father, daughter, babysitter, that this is a key priority issue. And in terms of us addressing it, we need to start looking at things like education and so on and so forth. So Erica, I want you to hold the thought on the action that you want, because we're now, we already put in the poll in the chat. So as we speak, we're also going to be asking you to also be linking on to the poll and to put in the action that you want to see based on the priority issue that you are raising. So who else do we have? Anybody else who would want to share what they consider a priority issue that ought to be addressed now? And we can also look at these issues in terms of the what is affecting us now, whether it's COVID, whether it's flooding, whether what are these issues that are affecting us now that you would consider priority that ought to be addressed? Do we have anyone else?
Okay, Caroline, Danilin Maivit here.
Go right ahead,
Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
I was using the hands up, thinking that's the protocol, so you could see who is queuing up to take it in. So I don't know. Just as a thought. So
Right
if
ahead.
That's not seen by you, I put my hands up, just whether that mechanism is activated or not. But what I would want to see for me as a priority area is the gender equality, and I will save my responses you have directed in regards to why that is chosen for me when it comes to the solution.
No, you can go right ahead.
Can
go right ahead.
Okay.
And yes, because, but I'm also asking, just as a little clarity, I'm also asking that you put it also in the poll. Because what is important for the poll is that we're beginning to see what everybody is saying, and then we begin to see what are going to be some issues that is resonating with everybody.
I get
so
that.
Go right
it will
ahead
allow
and
the
speak
more
to it,
statistical quantification of it.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
For me, it's gender equality, and I will put it in this context in a way that it has really clarified why that surfaced for me. When I look at social interventions, I see it at 3 levels. And when I see the 3 levels, it comes to my mind in terms of if we see a river over flooding. And the first level would be those who are drowning in that river, you will go in and you will seek to save them. I see that in the form of soup kitchens, in the form of domestic violence abuse houses like Haven houses. So you're in the river saving them. The second level I see it is in the form of what the previous speaker spoke about, where you do education to prevent people from drowning in that river. The third level, which is where I feel the greatest gap exists in Belize, is what I would call the dam, where you even prevent completely that river from coming over. And for me, that is advocacy. And I really, really want to see advocacy ramped up in Belize in the area of gender equality. And why do I choose that? Because I feel very strongly that the advocacy measure goes deeper to the root in terms of solutions and how we can address many of what we are faced with from a policy level, from a deeper level. We need to get to the core of the problem. And for me, advocacy that impacts policy is the way to go to the root of much of what we're feeling and experiencing in Belize. So for me, in terms of gender issues, it's advocacy, and advocacy going towards policy formation. And if I was to even get even more focus, it's getting more women in the seats for policy decision making.
Okay. Gender equality is a big issue there. I'm coming from Dr. Maivit, and particularly she speaks to the issue of advocacy and how important advocacy is, and gives such an insightful way of looking at the whole issue of social intervention, from the issue of drowning to preventing people from drowning to the dam. I thought that was so great in terms of, and effective in terms of explaining it. But certainly gender equality is something that is important. And we saw that and a part of that component as well, spoken to from the previous caller. Zana, anyone else having their hands up? I mean, they're,
Good morning.
Zana? Anyone else?
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Christy.
Hi.
Go right ahead, Christy. I can hear you. I think we all can.
So like the invisible members of our society right now are those with disabilities. And if we look at some of the problems today, whether it's just the unemployment, the people wandering the streets, the mental illness, that sort of thing, if those people had gotten help as children, we might not have some of the problems we have today. And what's happening is, yes, we have the physical disabilities that need to be focused on, but it's invisible disabilities, the learning disabilities, the problems with mental health that is largely ignored from youth. We don't have the services right now to adequately diagnose people, to adequately treat our children, provide therapies and support. And all our kids, whether it's ADD, autism, learning disabilities, Down syndrome, whatever, all of these kids have potential. And unless we address these needs, once they hit 13, 14 and are out of cell marriage, there's nothing for them and they just become a burden on their parents. And when their parents die, it's a burden on society. And I feel like a lot of our youth out there that are out there giving trouble, they flunked out of school because they probably had an undiagnosed disability and they did not get the help. So if we can start by building capacity in this country, training so that we can do proper diagnosis, teaching our teachers the proper way to address these different disabilities and helping these children, they can grow in and fulfill their potential, whether their potential is just being a fisherman or being a doctor, whatever that is, they can fulfill potential and be a productive member of society. Without that assistance, without any help for these families and for these children with invisible disabilities, all they are going to become is a burden on our society. And we're going to see some of the same problems we're addressing here. The poverty for these families, the violence, the youth wandering the street. We need to look at that member of this group of our society and address their needs because they have been ignored for far too long.
Thank you very much, Christy. And Christy, would you say that prior to, let us say, COVID-19 and the pandemic that we've had, that this is an issue that existed and perhaps COVID-19 has compounded a situation? Could you speak to that?
Yes, it's an exacerbated problem. We haven't had, I mean, we have no developmental pediatricians who are the ones who are supposed to diagnose all of these things. Even the NARCI staff that's there, they don't have the proper training to do a proper diagnosis. The teachers, they were like, oh, we had one special ed unit training in university or whatever. They're not getting the proper assistance. COVID exacerbated the problem. I remember the first day that they announced the shutdown. My first thought was, how am I supposed to survive if it's just me and my son? He's 13, but severely autistic. So he's about a 2-year-old level. If I'm locked in my house, how am I supposed to go and get groceries? How do I take a shower and leave him alone? And nobody in government even thought about, what about the health, the providers, the service providers that help these families? Where do they go with school lockdown? How do these families work? Everybody's struggling with homeschooling. Can you imagine parents who have to work and have children who need one-on-one education because they are even further behind than any of the neurotypical kids. And you can think about this with any disability. People who had to go with that kidney problems and have to go get dialysis, they've already had problems getting dialysis. Now they are at higher risk for COVID and they have to get on a bus to get to dialysis, and nobody thought about them. We are the invisible part of society and nobody's thinking about it. And I have a parent, for example, in San Pedro who has a 17-year-old who, because she's not getting out or anything, has become absolutely aggressive, having meltdowns, talking to herself, hearing voices in her head. And when we call for services, they're like, well, you have to bring her in. I'm like, well, she's refusing to come in. She's 17, she's bigger than the mom. And they're like, well, then you better call the police. And that's the only option we have in this country is, well, we should call the police on our kids to try and get them to a mental health expert. It's absolutely astonishing how little services there are for people with disabilities in this country. And COVID has made it even harder on the families that are trying to help as caregivers, and for these kids and young adults who are struggling right now.
Thanks a lot for that, Christy. Certainly, again, let me remind you all that while we speak to the issues, I'm also asking you to click onto the poll and write in what you consider the immediate priority actions that we should be taking to address these challenges. In the chat, you can also put it in the chat as well, and I've noted that several people are agreeing with you. Christy, Sherry is saying they agree with you, and Erica is saying so true. And let us see what is coming in from you all in terms of what should be the immediate priority actions, because we have to look at it at UN75. As Anna has said, this is an opportunity for us to start talking about the world that we want to see. What is this world and what is this future that we want to create? But in creating that future, we also have to start reflecting and thinking about where we are today and what are some of these issues that we are experiencing today, and what are some of these challenges that we are experiencing today. And then what is that gap between the future that we want and where we are today? And then what do we need to do? And what we need to do comes in at the beginning or immediately. This is what we have to do now. And so this is what we are asking. What are those immediate priority actions that we need to do now? And then we are also going to start thinking about what we need to do in the future. So let's see what has been said by you all in terms of your voting. The ones that are jumping out so far, we're seeing human rights information, good and bad touch workshop, gender equality, nutrition knowledge, social development, mental health, advocacy to enforce law, education, educate on gender issues, corruption, true inclusive society, food security, comprehensive awareness, capacity building, better education. And so we're seeing a lot coming out: education, capacity building, information, workshop, gender issues, laws, gender equality, mental health. There is no one that is jumping out at you. So clearly you're saying that all these things are very important, and we're going to take those recommendations that you have said, which ought to be priority actions to address some of the challenges that you have said. Now, as we start also putting in this thinking, we have on our thinking cap now, and we're processing and we're thinking and we're analyzing information. Let me also say, Dr. Donnelyn Mivett is saying, I want a world where women have an active voice in decision making at the policy level. So that's the future that Donnelyn is seeing. And so in terms of that future, then we want to know what we need to do now. And we're seeing some of it in the immediate priority. And so we want to then start talking now about 2045. Because having looked at all of these challenges that you have put out, all of the issues that you have discussed and saying, okay, we need to do these things now, does it give you a sense as a Belizean? Do you feel that the people of Belize, yourself, the people of Belize and the world, based on what we are experiencing now, do you think that we are going to be better off, that we are going to be worse off than today, or are we going to be the same as today? And I'm going to ask Zana to put the second polling question, survey question for us in our chat so that you can click on, and then we will have a conversation as to why you may be thinking this way. So we've started to hear these conversations and the many issues, from violence to gender inequality to the invisible persons with diverse abilities, or differently abled, and so on and so forth. So we are listening to all of these issues, and we're listening to all of these challenges. And we're saying, well, these are some of the things that we need to do now. But taking all of that into consideration, do you believe as a person that by 2045, when the UN becomes 100 years, that Belize and the global society, are we going to be better off? Are we going to be worse off? Or are we going to be the same? In other words, do you have hope for the future? Do you have hope that things are going to change? Do you have hope that we will have gender equality? Do you have hope that we are going to have a more inclusive society? Do you have hope that we are going to see elimination, eradication of domestic violence? Do you have hope that in Belize, that people will have access to healthcare regardless of who you are? Do you have hope for the future? So talk to us. Do you think in 2045, the people of Belize and the world will be better off, worse off, or the same? And we want to then speak to these issues. Why do you feel this way? I'm seeing most people are saying there's a sense of optimism, that most people are saying we'll be better off. That is what we're seeing so far. Second, people are feeling that we're going to be the same. And then you have a few who are saying that we'll be worse off. So again, I'm going to ask Zana to look at who is unmuting their mic, and to ask you all then to share why you're voting this way. Why do you feel that we will be better off? Why do you feel that we will be worse off? Or why do you feel that, you know, nothing is really going to change? Things are going to be status quo, as they like to say. Nothing's going to happen, nothing's going to change. We're still going to be the same come 2045. Anyone want to share their thoughts on that? Do you think in 2045, the people of Belize and the world will be better off, the same, or worse off? Some of you have said, most of you actually have said better off. So there's an optimism there. Can you speak to that? Anyone wish to take it on? Donnelly, Dr. Donnelly, Margaret?
Yeah, and then
Yes.
Sherry.
And then who? And then it's Sherry?
Yes.
Okay, good. So Dr. Margaret and then Sherry.
I simply believe in my heart that unless as an individual and as a people we have hope, then nothing will change. A hopeful heart, a hopeful thinking says there is better. And if I am to look at myself individually, I believe that I can grow, I believe I can evolve. And so I have that same heart and hope and belief in my country and in my people. I take a look around, even in recent times amidst what's happening. And even though there is a lot we can complain about, I still look and I see that many persons are looking for ways to make a difference. I see people getting organized. Organizations suggest that people have hope, that if we come together, organizations suggest that we believe that individually we cannot do it alone. And if we have the belief we cannot do it alone, then it says to me, we are saying we got to collaborate, which to me says we are recognizing that changing our community is not a single job for one person. It's a job for all of us. It's a we job. That gives me hope. Admittedly, I can at times feel a bit frustrated when I look beyond in terms of my macro level leaders to say, I want to see you articulate a vision that is so clear for me that I can find myself in harmony with that vision, or even challenging it if I feel that it's off the mark. So when I look at it from that perspective, I feel at times frustrated. But I still look around and I see where Belize has evolved and has changed, maybe in ways some of us individually would rather it not be, but in ways many of us can also agree we have seen improvements, and that continue for me to ignite hope. And so for myself, recognizing what 2020 has done for me at the individual level in having to reflect deeply on what it is I want of me and of my country, and making some personal resolution about the fact that if I want change, I must become more active with my voice. I must become more active with my behavior, and I must become clear on what I want. Because when I know what I want, I can ask succinctly for what it is I want. Those who have to open their ears to what I have to say will be able to better hear my message when I am clear with my message. So I am very hopeful about what the future holds for Belize, because as well, I see the young people having a voice, even if at times it's contentious. I applaud the fact that our youth are beginning to express their voice. So for me, that's hopeful. And so I believe 2045, Belize will be a better place.
Great, and I think that one of the key issues you raised, Dr. Maivit, is the we. That singularly by ourselves you can't do much, but together, the we and the collaboration that is needed to create a better space. And this is what this dialogue is all about. It's appreciating how that collaboration can take place in terms of us shaping the future. Sherry, you're next.
Hi, morning, thanks. Yeah, I totally agreed with what Dr. Maivit was saying, and that importance of collaborating, working together is going to be essential as we move ahead. When you first asked the question, are we going to be better off in 2045? I think just sitting here, I thought I was almost going to say no. I don't even know if it would have been the same or worse, just sort of looking around as our numbers are our positive cases keep increasing, and you're seeing media reports around the world of, people not wanting to respect the health of others. So, not wanting to wear a mask and not, sort of going along with social distancing and staying at home. And that's just been really frustrating, thinking, well, if we can't do something like this that's happening right now and is an immediate important event that's happening to us, then what's it going to be like in 25 years? But then I, thought no. And when you said, do I have hope? Yes, absolutely, I have hope. And so yes, I believe things have to get better. And I think they will get better. I think we're learning a lot from what we've been going through over the last few months. But what I think in order for things to get better, with everything that was mentioned earlier, with regards to gender equality, recognizing and working and providing that assistance for people with mental health issues and those with hidden disabilities, food scarcity, all of that. We need to be able to work together, but also respect each other and the push for human rights. I don't think I don't think we're there yet with respecting each other's human rights. And we can talk about all of the different agendas. Everybody has an agenda. But if we can respect each other for their agenda, and just stop with the discrimination, I think that that is what's going to allow us to really move ahead and sort of cut through all of that and just see us for people. I think that's what's going to get us through and result in things being much better for us. Absolutely recognizing the youth and allowing them to have that voice and encouraging their voice and listening to them, regardless of whether you agree with it or not. They are the majority, and they're the ones who are going to be taking on those leadership roles and pushing us forward into 2045. And so they need all of the encouragement and respect, again, that we can afford them. But also taking chances. I think that's something too we've seen. We have to be willing to take risks and really be innovative and stop doing the status quo. Everything from crime prevention to poverty alleviation, and just step out, do something that might seem maybe odd or maybe even a little bit scary. But I think at this point we've realized that what's been going on for the past while hasn't been working. And so we need to try something new and be willing to take those risks and take those chances and see what happens. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. And so we're hearing again, what are some of the changes that we think needs to happen for us to have this future? And it's great to have hope, because I think if we don't have hope, then it's almost as if we're giving up on the future. But oftentimes the decisions we make are based on our realities and what is confronting us. And so what the UN is looking for is, again, the ideas, the great ideas for change, what needs to happen. We can all accept that COVID-19 has sort of upended the world, changed the world. Yes, there are issues that were already there, and in so many ways it has compounded some of the issues and the challenges and the problems that we had. But clearly we are out in 2020 and we're now moving towards 2045. And so the optimism and having optimism is also is so very important, and hope and so on and so forth. And so if you are then talking to the UN at this time and you would be saying to the UN, what can we do in 2045 to bring about this world that you want to see? We've spoken about the immediate priorities, things that we want happen now. But then we also have to start thinking, what is it that you want to see in the future? Because yes, whatever decisions we make today will have an impact on what happens in the future. There are issues we have to deal with now. And you all have brought those out. But there are also some issues that will, as many of you all have said before, it will take time before you reach a point where certain things are going to happen. So we're going to start talking now a little bit more about what would be some of those future priority actions that you would want to see. Do we have anybody else unmuted, Zana, who wanted to speak to the issue of 2045?
No, Miss Carolyn.
All right, good. So let's start talking a little bit about future priority actions. Now, think I am in 2045. What are going to be some of these actions that you would want the UN to be thinking of at that point in time? Now, this is putting on our thinking cap and be visionary. If we are saying that we want to see gender equality, if we are saying that we want to have a more inclusive society, if we are saying we want to have a society where there's human rights, respect, if we are saying we want to see a society where our people are educated, where young people's voice are being heard, if we're saying that, this is a kind of society that we want to create, yes, there are things we can do now, but what do we need to do then? So let's start talking a little bit about some future priority actions. And Zana has put up the poll. And so the question then, what should be the future priority actions to address these challenges that we have all been speaking about? Accepting that some things we can do immediately, and then there are others that will come over time. So what should the future priority actions of the UN be? Perhaps now some of the issues that we have to address are linked to ensuring that, I think in terms of when Krista was speaking, for example, she was talking about the fact that we're going through this COVID pandemic, and you have persons who are differently abled who, due to the pandemic, have to be under lockdown, don't have the ability to go to be on the public transportation system, don't have the ability to access the groceries, or currently there's the educational facilities that don't provide for them. So immediately there are some things that need to be done. But then what are those things that have to be done in the future? We were talking earlier, remember Erica was talking about issues of education. When she said, well, these are the things that we would want to see now, but when you start talking education, there are some long-term components to education. Dr. Maivit was talking about advocacy. And how we need to focus on advocacy. So there are some things, like I said, we can do now where you spoke about it, but what should be the future priority action? So we have a poll going, and we want to ask you to put it in the chat, or we prefer that you also, or you can do both. You can click on the link and start putting in what it is you need the UN to be thinking about to do in 2045. What should be the future priority actions? And we can unmute the mics, and Zana is going to let me know whose mics are on mute. And you can speak to these future actions as well, these future priority actions. So the poll is open. Would like to hear from you in the chat. We can hear in the chat, or we can put it in the poll, and we can also unmute the mic and speak about it. Anybody wish to take that on? Anybody?
We have Miss Maivit's hand up.
Okay, Danielin, Dr. Maivit, go ahead. Dr. Maivit, and then we'll have Sherry.
Carolyn, sorry, my hand was up from the first instance when I thought the process was in. I was typing in first in the chat, formalizing my thought before I go. So I would want to finish formalizing the thought I was framing out in the chat.
Okay, so let's hear from Sherry then. No, that's okay. This is a conversation. It's ongoing. Sherry, you wanted to speak?
Yeah, I just saw somebody added education. And perhaps because I'm in education, that's just sort of what I keep going to. And not so much, not necessarily just tertiary level, but I think really focusing, looking at our primary, our secondary, our TVETs. But a lot of, I guess, what I was speaking about earlier and what's coming up, I think, when I go back to human rights, but really, having to teach kids about respecting each other, understanding each other. I come from the anthropology field, and so I think about, the cultural differences that we all have, and respecting and understanding each other. But getting kids from when they're really young to understand this and to be able to try to make sense of it all. So then as they grow older, whether they continue to high school, TVETs, university, or junior college, or even, eventually lifelong learning, but they can also impart this on their parents too. I think when you catch kids from when they're young and instilling this in with them, and especially to like ethics, and the importance of that, that's kind of where I go. And I think from there, you start to see the changes. The same thing when it comes to environment issues as well, and sustainable development. Teaching kids to respect the environment, something simple as not littering, water conservation, that sort of thing. I think then I know it might take a while, but you're investing in those next generations. And that's where I think that change starts to happen.
Excellent, and it's interesting that you speak to also the issue of sustainable. Start looking at sustainable development and the fact that by 2045, our actions really should be tied and linked into creating a Belize that adheres to such principles of sustainable development. What we see in the polls, we're seeing government capacity development, we're seeing social development support, increased digitalization, and I think I'm just seeing this coming out now in terms of the digital world and technology. So technology again is something that is changing, and when this conversation was ignited, we can all accept that we're living in a very complex time, but also a time that is changing, and it's changing and evolving so fast. And technology is one of those areas that is evolving and changing, and it's going so fast. But the opportunities that are coming with it, but also the challenges and the risks that are also coming with it. And so it was good to see increased digitalization, because COVID-19 again has also shown us where the world has changed in where we live and where we access healthcare, education, how we deal with our financial operations, and so on and so forth. So technology is certainly a big one. Group empowerment. Again, that collaboration that we keep talking about, and the fact that it has to be through these efforts that we must embark on has to be through collaboration, but also it's about empowerment and knowledge, and Sherry spoke about it, Dr. Mivett spoke about it as well. The whole issue that people have to have the knowledge, and it's by having the knowledge that you are empowered and you can engage in advocacy to bring about the kind of change that you want to see. I see legislation for women. I see the empowerment of the youth in the chat, social development support, so very important. So what we're also seeing then is that we're talking about by 2045, we're seeing here that we want to see more social development support, equal representation, equal participation. We can't talk about gender equality if we're not talking about equal participation and equal representation of women, legislation for women, youth empowerment, respect. And it's not just from what I've gathered, from what I've heard, it's about not only respect for each other, but it's respect for the environment, the places in which we live. So it's not just about people, it's also about respecting our environment. So these are very important future priority actions that are linked back to some of what Zana was saying, where she said that, are we on track? Are we on track with gender equality? Are we on track with human rights? Are we on track with achieving our sustainable development goals by 2030? The fact that we're having this discussion, the fact that COVID-19 has occurred and has having us now having to rethink and refigure and think outside the box and be more innovative in the way we do, is telling us that there are certain action that we need to bridge this gap. To make the world a more inclusive world, for them to be gender equality, for us to achieve our sustainable development goals. And you're saying these are the things that we need to do that. We need to have respect for all. We need equal participation and representation and legislation for women. We need youth empowerment. What is jumping out of us, again, is social development support. And that seemed to be a very strong point coming from this group, women and social, gender equality issues and social development support. And so that in itself then leads us to our other question, because again, this is a UN75 dialogue, and going back to something that you all have also said, the whole issue of collaboration. What has happened and what is happening, what we're seeing that the impact of a lot of what has been happening, whether it's the pandemic, COVID-19, whether it's climate change issues, whether it's technology, whether it's the demographic shifting and trends that are happening, whether it's gender inequality, these things are not, or these issues are not just confronting Belize. These issues really are global issues. Climate change is a global issue. The COVID-19, we have seen how it originated in China and has now covered the entire world. So these are global issues. And so the collaboration that I heard Dr. Maivit and spoke about earlier, we can start seeing that the collaboration is not just about collaborating with ourselves, but it also starts thinking of the collaboration that is also needed throughout globally. And so we then need to start asking ourselves, is that global cooperation, particularly through the United Nations, is it important for us to address the challenges of today and in the future? So we're going to put up another poll to ask if you believe that global cooperation through the United Nations is vital to dealing with the challenges of today and the future. Because if we talk of addressing all these challenges, and there are many, we see them in our own little space, but we are also seeing that these challenges also are globally. And Sherry is saying in the chat that that I don't think we are on track when it comes to youth empowerment. And so you all then put out what are some of the actions that we need to take to put us back on track. And then the question then becomes, is the United Nations vital for the kind of cooperation that we need between countries, between each other, to actually deal with these challenges? So Zana, I'm going to ask you to put in that poll that asks the question, is global cooperation through the United Nations vital to deal with the challenges of today and the future? Cooperation, collaboration, we're learning more and more that individually you can't do it all. Together is important, because I recall another dialogue that we had where the emphasis was on youth, empowering the youth, the energy of the youth. But that must also be matched with the wisdom and experience of the old. And then we hear Christy talked earlier about being more inclusive in this. And one of the principles really of the United Nations is leave no one behind. Everybody must participate and be part of the movement towards creating this future. The future can't be solely for one group of people. The future can't be solely for one country. It really has to be about all of us, because all of us are living in a society and in a global space where something happens, as we have seen with COVID-19 in one country, and that then spreads and go throughout the rest of the world. Climate change, the issue of rising temperature. What is happening in one country affects another country, and Belize is experiencing some of this. The recent flooding, for example, we kept hearing from many people how it has been unprecedented, the flooding that we have been experiencing and the millions of dollars of damage that has occurred. But that is not just about Belize. The weather is not just about Belize. In reality, the weather affects us all. So is global cooperation through the United Nations vital to deal with these challenges that you have discussed? Issues of human rights, issues of gender inequality, issues of education, issues of making the society and the world a more inclusive world. Christy is saying, when I say equal participation, I mean for everyone. Nothing about us without us. You can't make policy for those with diverse abilities without involving them. You can't make policy for women without women. You can't speak about equal rights without involving everyone. So that is an explanation of that equal participation that we kept seeing in the priority actions that must take in. So far, we've seen that more people are saying yes, that global cooperation through the United Nations is vital to deal with the challenges of today and tomorrow and the future. And you have identified these challenges, both in terms of what we're experiencing now and what we are going to experience in the future. But you all are also saying that you're optimistic, and most of you have hope that the future is going to be a better space for us. And so we're saying yes, that the global cooperation through the United Nations is vital. Now, having said that, how could you describe the United Nations? And I'm going to ask Zana to put up that polling question for us. And I'm going to ask you if you can, in a word or two, describe the United Nations. They want to hear from you what it is you believe is their image, what it is, how do you see them, how would you describe them? And we really want to hear from you. Have you interacted with the United Nations in Belize or globally? Are you aware of the work that the United Nations is doing? What role do you see the United Nations will have in terms of addressing some of these issues that you raised? Human rights issues, gender equality issues, issues of non-inclusivity and particular groupings like those with autism, disability, and so on being excluded, women excluded from the decision-making table, increase in violence and crimes against women, systemic barriers in terms of dealing with those issues in the community, in the workplace, in the educational systems, in the offices, whether it's the private or public service. These are all issues that we're saying we're confronted with. But do you see the United Nations in a role in terms of addressing issues of poverty, inequality, and so on and so forth? So what word would you use to describe the United Nations? Well, I see a couple words already jumping out at us. Good at capacity building, ineffective at results, a potential partner, a powerful force for change. Let's see, we have mobilizer. So those are some, so keep them coming. Let us see how you describe the United Nations. They want to hear is basically what you think of them, how you perceive them, because this is very important in terms of the road ahead. Because we are having this great conversation really that is saying that is going to guide the UN and to guide their programs between now and 2045 when they celebrate their 100 years. Yes, we have started a Sustainable Development Goals journey. It was supposed to be from 2015 to 2020, but certainly COVID-19, the flooding, it has really eroded much of the gains that we have made. So what do we do now and what do we do then? You are informing that process. And so it's important for them to know basically how is it that you see them. So we see some great, we see idealistic, mobilizer, powerful force for change, global leader, sets direction. So I think these are some, but the good at capacity building seem to be the one that is jumping out at us. It says good at that's the one that's the most powerful in terms of what you all collectively are saying. And so we also see another one in the chat. UN is also a resource distributor. So these are certainly some great way in which to describe the United Nations and for them to know more or less how it is that you feel that how you feel about them and the work that they do. I see also addresses world issues. So we have quite a lot. Sets direction, idealistic, potential partner, powerful force for change, good at capacity building, ineffective at results. Okay, that means they need to do more better on that one. Addresses world issue, global leader, mobilizer. So as we wind down then into a final question, I'm going to ask Zana to put up this last question for us. How can the United Nations better manage these challenges? In other words, how do you think, or what would you advise, or how would you guide the United Nations in terms of improving on the work that they're doing? We have heard all the challenges that we've had: education, human rights issues, gender inequality, violence. We've heard all of that. Healthcare issues, youth issues, the fact that we have a society that where persons are marginalized. Yes, we need to do better. Yes, we need to ensure that by 2045, we have a society and we create the future that you're optimistic about. So how can the United Nations better manage these? What would you advise them? How would you guide them as to how to improve? How can they better achieve, work towards achieving gender equality? How can they improve in the work that they do to ensure that vulnerable groupings like persons with autism, disability, and mental issues are brought in, are brought into the society, are brought into the decision making? How can they improve on ensuring that more women are in leadership roles? How can they improve in terms of reducing violence? They work on delivering on the work that they do to address some of these challenges that you have, to better manage some of these challenges. Okay, so we already start seeing some ideas, some guidance to the United Nations. It says, provide more support to the country's advocate groups, government and non-governmental, so they can better work in country for these international goals. Increase partnerships with local organizations and NGOs. And this has been a thread throughout our conversation, our dialogue, the importance of these partnerships with grassroots organizations and local NGOs. Anything else you would like to advise the UN? And at this point, we are also, like I said, you can unmute your mic and you can speak to the issue. We ask that you write it also, but you can also speak to the issue so that we can hear in this dialogue what would be your advice to the United Nations to better manage the challenges that are going to confront us now and the ones that are emerging and that are going to confront us in the future. Another one, respect issues of smaller nations and have authority to impose sanctions on larger nations who violate laws. Hold countries accountable. Okay, so we have 4 great advice and guidance. Do we have any mics that are open, Zana?
Mine is Caroline.
Okay, go right ahead.
But I believe the point was raised almost in the last mention that you gave, because I sit here totally in my head working through how can I sift it to a very distinct statement. And it pushes me back to recognize that at the United Nations level, we do have the G7, the G20, which are really the global leaders that set the pace. And oftentimes we have to accept as well and recognize that although it's about coming together at the United Nations level and having that discourse as individual countries in a collaborative form, the louder voices, based on the bigger economics of it, plays a greater role. Hence the fact you end up with the G7 and the G20. And oftentimes I am pushed to think about how does the United Nations move to get a collective voice from the smaller developing countries? How do they get to hear their voice so that it's not drowned out? Because if really the temperature is set by the big global leaders, how do you know exactly where we stand in terms of a collective? And so that for me has been playing out with my head in my head, because oftentimes indeed it has to be nuanced even among ourselves when we talk about less developed or developing countries, you know. And so for me, I was thinking, how does the United Nations do that to make things more tailored to us as a collective voice? When I listen to our Prime Minister speaking about the Caribbean countries themselves having its own unique dynamics playing out. So for me, it is how do they make that in, how do they work that and massage that, or can massage that to make it more meaningful and impacting down at the level where the needs are. Basically, understanding our point of needs, where we are, exactly where we are.
Great. And that's certainly a key issue in terms of the voice of what the issues of the smaller nations. And I think it's very important. This is why these dialogues are important, and why it's important that we participate, because it's through these mechanisms that we are able to collectively elevate the voice of small countries like ourselves and quote unquote those developing countries. We have from Sherry, who is saying, remove the 5 permanent seats on the Security Council. That's a big one, Sherry, in terms of a recommendation. But let me read a couple others. So we said, yes, we had that, respect issues of smaller nations and have authority to impose sanctions on larger nations who violate the law. And this go back to some of the issues Dr. Mavitt just recently raised. Fund local and indigenous groups directly and continue to empower local groups. And I think that is also so key, because oftentimes it's the local groups that are on the ground, the indigenous groups that are on the ground, that are actually interacting and engaging, particularly with communities that have been marginalized, groupings that are vulnerable. You know, we spoke a little earlier about youth. We spoke about persons who are differently able. We spoke about persons with autism and so on. And then, of course, you have the aging population, because again, our demographics is telling us that by 2050, we're going to have more aged people than we have young people. So even though now we are talking about young people and youth empowerment, the population data is telling us that by 2050, we're actually going to be having more aged population. And so where are their voices, and how will their voices be recorded? And so this is why these dialogues are so important, because one of the key issue that the UN75 team in Belize is trying to do is to also ensure that the voices of groupings that perhaps have not been heard, and this is why I'm so excited and inspired when I see groups that are coming out to these dialogues, representing people whose voices are rarely heard. Shireen is saying indeed, and I think Shireen comes from the Council of the Aged, because it's so very important that no voice is left behind, that if we speak of an inclusive society, it's not about elevating one over the other, but to ensure that the National Council of Aging, thank you, Shireen, it's to ensure that every grouping and every person is actually representing, and the voices are heard. And Christy is saying exactly. And so this particular dialogue, sometimes we have large dialogues and sometimes we have small ones, but I often find in the smaller ones we tend to be able to elevate some distinct voices, like we've done today, the voice of women, the voice of persons who are differently abled, persons who are autistic, the voice of the youth, the voice of persons who have been victims of violence. It's very important that these voices are recorded, and the world that you all want to see, and the future that we want to shape, that these are documented. And going back to the hope for 2045, that we have a clear roadmap in terms of where we want to go, so that the future that we want to shape begins now. So I am going to just ask if anyone wishes to make any last contributing point to this particular dialogue. Our dialogues normally last an hour to an hour and a half. I'm also going to ask that you also take the online polling. Zana has put it in the chat, the UN75 online. So that is another way that we are including our voice in the global conversation. But certainly, I'm asking you if you could please take the online survey. And if anybody wants to, at this time, anybody wants to add any final thoughts on this dialogue before we close off, anybody? Anybody wish to say anything, add anything? Just unmute and go ahead. Any final thoughts? Any final thoughts? Okay, so if we have no final thoughts, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here, for taking the time out to join us. We really appreciate it. The dialogue continues. It doesn't stop. I see Shireen post something. It is very important, even now when we recognize 16 days of activism against violence against women and girls. It is important that we recognize older women too. So it is important to adapt how we collect data, form policies, and provide services to older women experiencing abuse, doing so in a way that is both gender and age responsive. Thanks for that, Shireen. That really adds a great closing to our dialogue. So please take the online survey. The conversation continues. If by chance you have a group that you want to have a dialogue with, please feel free to reach out to us. We're quite willing to have small dialogues with small groupings to hear what would be your specific issue and your specific concern. So once again, thank you. And we continue this 2020. Stay safe, practice social distancing, make sure you wash your hands and keep on your mask. And see you perhaps at another dialogue or sometime in the rest of 2020 or leading to 2021. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you, Caroline.
You are welcome. Bye-bye.